Hello everyone, John Maher here. It's Thursday the 20th November 2025 and this is your weekly Grass10 grazing management update on the dairy edge. So what has happened in the last week? Well, a lot actually despite the poor weather. We got massive rainfall as many people will know and it made grazing conditions difficult. However, there was a huge variation in what happened in terms of grass supply. And it's a tale of the have and the have-nots. To say the least, we were a bit surprised by the figures that came into us this week from Pasture Base. I suppose the shocking figure of the week was that 40% of dairy farms had an average farm cover of less than 600. Now, this has massive implications on grass supply next spring. If you were to look at this group in total, the average farm cover for this group was about 468. So that was the surprise. We hadn't seen that coming. I suppose things have been going along nicely in terms of farm cover targets and where we are at the time of the year. All that being said, the average is actually read reasonably okay, but average is only one measure. And the averages of the farm cover this week were about 694, which is just less than 700. Growth was about 17, which is well above normal. And demand was 17 kilos per hectare per day. So the diet then was 11 kilos of grass, 4 kilos of meal, 4 kilos of silage, and the average grass being grazed about 15 or 1600. But averages only give you, 1 point in the whole process. It was a much bigger story than that, as a case of those who have plenty of grass and there's a pile of people who hadn't got a lot of grass. And I suppose that's where things got concerning for us. I suppose also of concern is the next few days, the predicted growth is only about 5 kilos per hectare per day on average. I accept it's a bit higher, maybe in Kerry and places, but the most of the country is going to be a cold week. Growth's going to be low. And if you compare it to this time last year, I know which was a very good autumn, growth was 14 for this week. And even in the wet year of 2023, which was diabolically wet, the growth was 9. So what it tells us, two things, is there will not be much catch up now here this week in terms of growth rate, or grass growth rate, and therefore the average grass supply on the farm won't improve that much. In actual fact, if you keep grazing, we could do an awful lot to remove spring grass out of the system. So it's really a case of caution. And I suppose when the weather is that little bit drier, there's a tendency maybe to stay grazing, which could be a very dangerous thing to do. So what does all this mean then, really? At the end of the day, simply put, 40% of farms have no hope of reaching the December 1st target of 650 to 700 kilos of grass strata per hectare to have early spring grass. And it means that 40% of the farms that we outlined will be short of early spring grass next year. So that's something that concerns us. Fair enough, some might argue we don't know what the spring will bring, but at the moment anyway, it certainly says that an awful lot of farms will not have enough grass to kick off at all. So what happened then, I suppose, well, either average farm cover wasn't built up well enough through the autumn, despite the above average growth rates, or too many farms grazed too long and too late. At the end of the day, the figures are what they are and tell us that unfortunately many farms are going to be behind on spring grass supply given any sort of a normal average winter. Incidentally, when you look back at the figures through all of September and October, those who had higher farm cover grew more. Often the arguments made that lower covers are easy graze and all, maybe reroute more. The figures for the last 2 months would not show that. Even this week, lower cover farms grew about 15, where the higher cover farms grew 17 or 18. So that's the story. So the week ahead now is going to be much lower growth rates. So the priority now for those, the 60% that do have grass cover on the farms of where they should be, is now to look at early spring grass supply. And I suppose these farms will have to be very careful in what they do. As I said, last year's growth rate was 3 times what it is today that's predicted for the week ahead. And we're about 10 days away from December the 1st. So if we grow 5 kilos per hectare on average per day, that adds 50 kilos to the average farm cover, 5 a day by 10 days. So if our average farm cover today was 650, then on December 1st, assume that you'd stop grazing, average farm cover will be about 700, which is about where most dairy farmers would need to be. However, if there is a higher demand on the farm next spring, maybe lots of cows calving in January, a high 6-week calving rate, a high stocking rate on the platform, say above 3 cows per hectare, then an average farm cover of 750 or higher would be required on December 1st. So what happens in the next week now is crucial here, really. The argument would sometimes said to me, what's one more paddock? Well, the impact of grazing one more paddock this week on spring grass supply should not be underestimated given the low growth rate predictions. So on average, just for a simple measure, the average paddock on the average dairy farm of one of 20 paddocks with a cover of about 1,200, if you graze that this week, it'll reduce your average farm cover by 50 to 75 kilograms of dry matter per hectare closing. So it does have a big impact. And this extra grazing is under the farmer's control. It's a case of, heads up, where are we at in terms of farm grass supply at the moment? If we're at 600, 650, most farms have to stop grazing. If there's a bit more grass in the system, fair enough, but be very, very careful that we don't take, one or two paddocks too many out of the system and therefore reduce the grass supply for December 1st, which is our target of about 650, 700 for most dairy farms. Speaking of weather, there may be an opportunity to spread lime on some paddocks that are now closed if the weather stays reasonably good or dry. As we know, about 60% of soil samples on dairy farms are suboptimal pH for what we call grass clover swards. Correcting the pH will not alone help ryegrass and clover survive, but also increases, soil nitrogen release and phosphorus release and I suppose K release to a degree, particularly phosphorus. So if you're behind on lime, it's no harm to play a bit of catch up on that too. I suppose turning to our feature farmer then, this week we brought Mike Ahern from Ballyduff back to us to do the newsletter. It's our final farmer feature of the year. Mike was awarded the Sustainable Grassland Farm of the Year award, competition winner. So it was just nice to finish off with him. Mike's story is he has a good dry farm, has a long grazing season. He does about 300 days. So his average farm cover at the moment, as of Monday, was 793, grew about 14, eating about 17, docked currently at about 2.4, 2.5, milking 223 cows, but 50 of those were dried off, I suppose. So he was milking about 270, 280. The cows are out by day, in by night, 7 kilos of grass, about 8 kilos of silage, 3 kilos of meal. During the wet weather last week, he missed 1 day's grazing all right, but managed to keep going the rest of the time by grazing what we call, the 13 or 1400s. He's got all the reseeded paddocks, both the spring ones and the autumn ones, grazed in late October. They have a cover roughly now about 700 or 800 kilos. Just to pick out one paddock on the farm, paddock 34, I suppose, just to say that it's the oldest and has the most clover on the farm and was grazing recently and has a cover of about 300 kilograms of dry matter per hectare per day. So I suppose to look at Mike's grazing, he has about 5 days left of last Monday, so he's probably finished on Friday thereabouts. Currently grazing the 2,000 covers that probably should have been grazed last week, but grazed the 13, 1400s to try and make life easier during the wet weather. As I said, missed 1 grazing last week using a 12-hour strip wire because regrowths are so good. Mike's target average farm cover for December 1st is about 750 kilograms per dry matter per hectare. And the farm will probably grow about 12.5 tonne for the year 2025. Now, the target was 14, but that's what summer droughts will do. Speaking of grass production for the year, it looks like the average on pasture base will be over 13 tonnes of grass grown per hectare nationally, which is a big improvement on previous years, which is good to see. So, I suppose just before we finish off, a reminder about the conferences coming up. The Dairy Women of Ireland conference is tomorrow, Friday, in Charleville Park Hotel. And the National Dairy Conference is on next week, the 26th of November in the Talbot Hotel in Clonmel. And on the 27th of November, which is a Thursday, the Kilmore Hotel in Cavan. So that's the story this week. It was one of a little bit of shock for us, but anyway, the show goes on. Just be careful with grazing those extra paddocks this week and keep an eye on those target figures. So if you'd like to hear more from the Grass10 team, subscribe to the weekly Grass10 newsletter, which is available on the Grass10 page on the Teagasc public website, and the link to this newsletter is also available in the description of this podcast. We'd like to thank those who support the Grass10 campaign, AIB, Grassland Agro, Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, FBD and the Farmers Journal. This has been your Grass10 update, and I will talk to you all again next week. We'll do 2 more weeks, I would think. Best luck and thank you.